In this video, I want to talk about the demonstrative pronoun. The demonstrative pronoun really is a pronoun that kind of points to things. And we have two types of demonstratives. We have what we call a near demonstrative, and the near demonstrative points to things that are close by. And then we have a far demonstrative that points to items that are distant from us. So near and far. In English, this basically is this versus that. And so our near demonstrative is going to be something like this cup, and our far demonstrative is going to be something like that cup. The paradigm for hutas, which is our near demonstrative, is pretty straightforward. This is going to be very similar to what we've learned in the 212, so 7 amounts 7.11, but also with the article. And there's two rules that you really need to know about this paradigm. First rule is note that every form is either going to begin with a rough breathing mark. And so we see the rough breathing mark in our nominative, singular, masculine, and feminine forms. And then if there's no breathing mark, it's going to be a tau. So we'll expect a rough breather or a tau in all the forms. The second thing that you need to keep in mind is note here that the vowel and the stem changes. And so in our masculine form, we have the omicron. And in the neuter as well, the omicron, upsilon in the stem. So we see the omicron. In the feminine form, we have the alpha. And the rule that I want to give you is this rule, the tail wags the dog. And so if you can remember that, the tail wags the dog, basically what that means is whenever you have an O vowel in the ending, omega there in the dative plural. So whenever you have an O vowel in the ending, we're going to get the corresponding vowel in the stem. And whenever we have an A vowel in the ending, we're going to get an alpha in the stem. So the tail wags the dog. And so since we have O vowels in the masculine and neuter, we have the O vowel in the stem. Since we have the A vowel in the feminine, we get the alpha in the stem. So the tail wags the dog. And so pretty much, if you know those two rules, this paradigm is pretty straightforward. Remember, we get that rough breathing mark, hutas, and then the genitive tutu, tuto, tutan, and then the neuter tuta, tutu, tuto, tuta. And if we're following the 212, you'll notice here that this tuta looks more like the article without the new. But note here that our nominative and accusative are going to be identical. And then our genitive and dative are going to be identical to the masculine. So pretty easy, pretty straightforward paradigm to write. It looks just like the article. The masculine looks like the second declension. You really need to realize that we have either the tau or the rough breathing mark, and then our rule, the tail wags the dog. If we have the A vowel in the ending, we're going to have an alpha in the stem. If we have an O vowel in the ending, we're going to have the omicron in the stem. The plural, same thing. We're either going to get that rough breathing mark. So here we have the rough breathing mark in the nominative plural, masculine and feminine, or the tau, and we have the tau in every other form. And this is where our second rule, the tail wags the dog, gets a little interesting. So in the masculine, we have an O vowel in all the endings. So we have the corresponding omicron, upsilon. But in the neuter, note here our neuter plural, we have an a vowel. So the stem shifts to alpha upsilon, both here in the nominative and the accusative plural. So the neuter form, the stem shifts. So we had the omicron upsilon in the singular throughout. But here we have the alpha upsilon in the nominative singular, and I'm sorry, the nominative plural and the accusative plural. And again, our neuter noun rules, this nominative and accusative are going to be identical. And then the genitive and dative are going to be identical to the masculine. And then with the feminine, we also get another surprise. So all throughout the plural, we have the alpha in the stem. So our rule, the tail wags the dog. We have that alpha in the stem. We have the alpha in the ending. Except our genitive plural, we have the O vowel. So that omicron gives us the omicron upsilon in the stem. So the tail wags the dog kind of works out with the plural. So if you have any difficulties with this paradigm, our two rules should help you solve them. Just realize that every form is going to have a tower, the rough breathing mark, and then the tail wags the dog. And so the uses of the near demonstrative, it can be used just as an adjective, or as an adjective, and so it would be used with another noun. And so we would say this word or this disciple, and so it's going to point to another noun. Or it can be used on its own, and in that way, when it's used on its own, it'll be used basically as a pronoun. And Mount says that you could translate it he or she, depending on the gender. I would translate it more as a demonstrative. I'd kind of bring out the demonstrative thrust a little bit and translate it maybe this man or this one or this thing or this woman, depending on the gender and number. The far demonstrative, the paradigm's a little bit more straightforward than what we saw with hutas. The far demonstrative, which is akanos, again looks just like our 2-1-2, except the stem is going to be consistent. We have our stem akena, and then our ending os. So just like lagos, lagu, lago, lagan, our masculine singular is going to be akenas, akenu, akeno with the iota subscript, akenon. Our neuter is going to look just like what we saw with hutas. It's going to follow our second declension, but again, we would expect that nu at the end, and it drops off. And so the neuter singular is basically akena, akenu, akeno, akena. And just like all of our paradigms, the nominative and accusative are identical. The genitive and dative are identical to the masculine. And then the feminine, just their first declension pattern, akene, akenes, akene with the iota subscript, akenane. So pretty straightforward declensional pattern with akenos. The plural, again, no big surprises there. Akenoi, akenon, akenois, akenus. The neuter, akena, akenon, akenois, akena. The nominative and accusative are identical, and the plural ends in that alpha. The genitive and dative are identical to the masculine, and then the feminine follows our first declension pattern, akenai, akenon, akenais, akenas. So pretty straightforward paradigm for our far demonstrative. The far demonstrative, just like the near demonstrative, can be used as an adjective. And so if it's used as an adjective, we'll see it modifying a noun, and it'll mean that or those. And so think in terms of, this cup versus that cup. This cup is pointing to something nearby. That cup is pointing to something far off. And then it can also be used as a pronoun. Basically, we'll see the demonstrative without a noun. And in that case, it'll be used as that or this. And depending on the gender, we might translate it that man or that woman or that thing. And again, just like our near demonstrative, I believe Mount says that you could translate it just as a pronoun, so like he, she, or it. But I like to bring out the demonstrative idea, and I would translate it a little bit more like that one, like what we've seen with substantival adjectives. Demonstratives generally, as a pronoun, they're going to be in an isolated position. So we'll see the demonstrative with no noun. But if it's used as an adjective, we would expect the demonstrative to be in the predicate position. So we'll see it in the predicate position. And so even though it's in the predicate position, we're going to translate it attributively. And so we would translate it this man. It's always going to modify an articular noun, and it's always going to appear in the predicate position. But even though it's in the predicate position, we're going to translate it attributively. So here's some examples. We'll see hutas ha anthropos. Note here that hutas is outside of our article noun construction. And so this is first predicate. And then note that hutas agrees with the noun that it modifies in case, number, and gender. And so we would translate that as this man. Same thing for akena, akena ta numa. Again, look, it's outside of our article noun construction. And so this is going to be predicate position. We've got our far demonstrative, and so we're going to translate it that spirit. So this man, that spirit. And then note here, Kana is going to agree with our noun in case, number, and gender. As a pronoun, there's not going to be any noun, and so it's just going to follow the pronominal use. And so hutas, I would translate hutas. Since it's masculine singular, I'm going to translate it as this man. A kena, since it's feminine singular, I would translate it as that woman. And then tauta, which is neuter plural, I would translate it as these things. And so, so even though Mount says you can translate it as the pronoun he, she, or it, I would still use that demonstrative to kind of bring out the pointer kind of feel with the demonstrative.